Okay, and are you doing the slides, Bronwyn?
Yes, in theory.
Yay.
Sharing screen.
Why is it saying to me tap to unmute?
I'm trying to share my screen. I think we're talking on the live feed though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you is that going to go on presenter?
Yes, it is now. It is now.
Yeah, I can't see it yet. Okay. Oh, so I'm just wondering if I should be talking or if Quibus, you should be talking. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I've been given the go-ahead to start talking. Sorry about the delay, but it's storming in the Cape. I see Marcel's also speaking about that. And I'm sitting in a very cold and windy restaurant, empty restaurant. So I'm hoping that you can hear me well, and I'm really looking forward to this session. So what we've done already is we've put up a poll just so I can see who's in the room. I see most of the people are employees of large businesses, but of the 69 people that are participating, only about 25 of you have voted. So it would be great to know who I'm speaking to because it also changes your experience in terms of whether you're the customer or not. If we look at the next slide, what the brief is for today is to look at the customer's experience during lockdown. And I've differentiated between the first type lockdown, level 5, and then the extension to 30 days, and then level 4, level 3. So that's the time frame we're looking at in terms of the lockdown. And then what was the impact of the crisis on customers' experience? So if we look at the next slide, I've just got them here offline so I can see. Right. So, I mean, these are our customers, and you've seen these queues outside Macro as people started preparing for lockdown and started panic buying. And it's really about understanding who the customers are that we speak about when we speak about the customer's experience. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see that research was done by UCT's Liberty Institute of Strategic Marketing. And what they did is they took the 58 million South Africans and they really divided them into market segments so that we could get an idea of which customers we're working with. And you'll see that when I speak to you about the experience, that it's different for each of these segments. And I've really kept it quite simple, just to make it easier to have the conversation. But you will see that a large portion, 50 million of the 58 million South Africans are in survival mode. And that's based on monthly household income. UCT's Institute of Strategic Marketing divided that segment into ultra poor with under 3,500 Rand household income per month. Then they had the survivors, 3,500 to 8,000 Rand per month as a household income. And then they had skilled strugglers, which is at the top of the end of the survivor segment, that have got up to 22,000 Rand per month. Then there's a dotted line, because now we're looking at a different segment, much smaller, very interesting to me. And you can see it's less than a sixth of our population. You're looking at the middle class, the upper middle class, and the top end. And I mean, it's alarming for me to think that the top end is only 600,000 people in South Africa. So let's look at the next slide. So if you look at those segments, you see I've just divided them just to make our conversation a bit easier to segment 1, which is survivors, which is a massive group of people, 50 million, most of our South Africans. And then we've got the middle class and the top end. And that's how I've divided this conversation. So then we look at the experience. I'm just waiting for the slides. And we've seen the sign. And what's interesting about this topic, and I really enjoyed putting time into preparing for it, because we've all experienced this crisis and we have experienced it as customers. And so regardless of the industry you're in, you have had your own personal experience, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to relate to what I'm sharing with you today. So the question that we're looking at is, how did South African customers respond, firstly to the news of the lockdown and then to the lockdown itself? So let's look at that time frame sort of unpacked. If you look, it's amazing, hey, if you just think back, December, we had things happening in China and Italy and Europe. And I don't know how much of you paid attention, but I was one of those people who was like, oh, you know, the world's overrating this thing. They're overreacting. And we had our first case reported on the 5th of March. It was people who had been to Italy and had come back on the 1st of March. She wasn't feeling well, had gone for testing, and then they discovered it was COVID-19. So the report was on the 5th of March. And then it was like we kicked into action. The announcement was made on the 23rd of March. And it's, I don't know if it's, you know, just reflecting on it, if you're thinking about that time, I can remember where I was and how we responded as a family. The 27th of March, the hard lockdown started. 1st of May, it was extended. Then the 1st of May, we had level 4, and then 1st of June, we had level 3. So if you look at the customer's experience and you think about how this is a change that happened. So it's really about how did we respond to the change? And probably the most obvious model or to use is Kubler-Ross's change curve, which initially was used in terms of dealing with grief. But now we've looked at embracing it in terms of organizational change. And in this instance, our change that we've experienced in South Africa because of this crisis. So each of us had a turn to respond to the shock. And then some of us, and I need you to think about how you responded, went into denial. And I promise you, I was in a bit of denial and didn't really want to acknowledge that there was a crisis, but that's, so be it. Then we went into anger or blame, and we started, some of us went into the bargaining and self-blame, depression and confusion. I actually realized with a lot of my friends and family, I actually picked that up and I saw it myself. And then acceptance and problem solving are now the tail end of that. And some of the individuals responded quicker, went through this process quicker and embraced the change. And you know how we speak about the diffusion of innovation, same principles, and you really have those people who were able to understand what the crisis was, immediately adapt, and then get on with their lives. And so that's this process that customers went through the same. And a friend of mine in a conversation said to me, it's amazing how we can embrace change, but it's very difficult for us to embrace uncertainty. So if you look at the next slide, and we've got another poll, I think, that's up. I'll just ask for this while I'm talking. So I don't know if that next poll is up. Yeah, here's okay, they're all live. Gives me an idea of the sectors. Okay. So just, if you look, one of the polls asked the question, where are you in the current curve? And a few of you have answered already, about 8 of you, but it would be interesting for me to see where you see yourself. If you can just go back to the previous slide, just to see where you see yourself in this process. Because as customers, we all are going through this change. We have to, it's something we have, a response we have to make in terms of this change. Okay, and most of you have already gone into stage 6 and 7, which is fantastic, because then it means you can move on with your life. And as long as we are in that, as long as we're stuck in one of the other phases, we actually need to be pulled almost through it. Okay. Just managing all the technologies here. So also what's interesting is this 5 stages of grief. And looking at that and thinking that as the news of the virus in South Africa, and then the news of how it was impacting on you as a customer, your life and what you had to do, and then from the business side, watching how you responded, because that's why I asked the question, which industry you're in. Some of you may or may not know, we own an ocean basket in Hermanus, and you can understand that we haven't traded now for 3 months. And so we watched how customers had to get used to the idea of us not being open. So we went through a process of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and each of us and each of our customers had to go through it at a different time. So that addresses customers, the experience, and then if we look at the next slide, it's really about understanding how our customers experienced the lockdown. These are pictures we've become so familiar with. I mean, who knew about masks? And now we've probably got 3 or 4. I'd love to know how many of you have masks, like different versions, you know? When you go cycling or running, you have this mask. When you go shopping, you have that mask. It's amazing how that has really changed our behavior. So these pictures I've used are really visuals that you've probably seen already. If we go to the next one, just reminding you again of the 3 segments that we've highlighted. The first segment is survivors, and this is really about survival and how our customers have responded. The middle segment experience more about fear of their aspirations being halted, and then the top end is more about a response in terms of lifestyle. So if we go on to, and let me see, sorry, that poll, I don't know if you've responded already, but one of the polls I asked is, where are you, which segment are you in? So I don't know if that poll is live, but it would be interesting to see. No one's answered yet, so I'm hoping that the poll's open. I'm just watching it quickly. And I mean, the fact that you are on this webinar means you have Wi-Fi, and that immediately puts you into the middle class top end. And so the poll demonstrated, I don't know if you can see the results, but it's very interesting to me. Yeah, there we have it. Okay. Only 6 of you have voted. It would be lovely to see the rest of you vote. Okay. Now, if we take that and we go on to the next slide, I don't know if you've experienced it, but we saw a multitude of memes going around. And this one really spoke to me in terms of the customer's experience during lockdown. And that was this one about who led the digital transformation of your company. And we've all been speaking about fourth industrial revolution. Kobus touched on it last week in his webinar. Chris mentioned it, even Jacques, throughout the webinar, we've mentioned in some way or form, mean or form, about the fourth industrial revolution. And really, what happened is those of us who could immediately went to a digital way of life. So that's got some very interesting things that I'm going to speak about in terms of customer behavior and how we consume things, our consumption behavior. So So if you look at the segment 1, the survivors, how did they respond? What was their behavior change due to the impact of this pandemic? Well, first of all, there was a significant loss of wage income, which you can understand. People living on the red line, people who are dependent on working, no pay, no work, no pay. Increased reliance on social grants, on family, on communities. I don't know if you've experienced it, but I've seen in our community the incredible response from disaster management and the community in terms of helping the survivors, family groups, helping each other to coexist wherever their shelters are. This group did not have access to Wi-Fi, and obviously it's a generalization, limited access to mobile data. And I've seen it with some of our employees. The minute there's no money, you have to choose between having food and having data. And yeah, that's a difficult choice. The type of consumption in terms of media is free-to-air radio and TV. That became the primary media consumption there. And then informal trade and transport restrictions impacted access to essentials. And you would know that on the news, a lot of criticism about how our townships in South Africa responded to social distancing and the lockdown, and how much coverage there was. CNN was really quite derogatory around what we were experiencing, and I'll speak to that now. So in this segment, you had a fear for now and future, another thing to worry about. There's a G missing there. Okay, let's see. Sorry. The poll is interesting, and let's just look again. Okay. Okay, someone feels these segments are not applicable to you. That's very interesting. I'm just thinking, I'm wondering if it's because you don't live in South Africa. Okay, so if you look on the next slide in terms of our first segment, survivors, just understanding the challenges faced by this group of customers. We saw in townships, if you were watching your TV, you would have seen that a lot of the survivors couldn't respond and weren't responding to lockdown rules. And there were three main reasons, and this is research that was done by Fushizi in different townships across South Africa. First of all, the gravity of the pandemic didn't hit home. People didn't realize what the fuss was about, and really, I mean, how bad can it be? Then many of the families living in townships just could not adhere to lockdown rules, simply because it's not one person in a residence or having their own room or having a area that they can isolate themselves from others. And then the last finding there was that the virus is no more hazardous than their daily realities. And when you have to fight to survive in terms of having food on the table, the fear around the virus becomes secondary. So what was the change in consumer behavior for this segment? And I think what was lovely to me is that the research actually confirmed this. So what happened is, although social distancing was done in a different way in this segment, what did happen is if you didn't know people, or if you didn't trust them, you kept away from them. You didn't know if they had the virus, so no, you limited contact there. Families were watching more TV, a lot of people sitting on social media, and that was really their source of news and updates. Men were doing the shopping. That was the observation, simply because they were could handle the risk. Yes, they could bear that exposure of risk. And what would happen is you'd have families buying together with other families to see if they could buy items that they could share and last longer. And they were buying in bulk from bigger retailers, because a lot of the spas and shops were closed down and couldn't operate, but also because it's much cheaper if you join forces with other families and households nearby, and you could buy in bulk. The ban on alcohol and cigarettes caused a lot of contention, and interesting enough, rise in soft drinks wasn't good for business. And cigarettes. You understand that market is a massive market. There was an overnight criminality increase because people became more desperate, and people had to choose between feeding families and whether they could buy data and send their kids back or help their kids interact at school. And then lastly in this group is the traditional measures or activities were off the table because there was such a hard limit on the number of people attending funerals, and so you couldn't participate in a funeral where you might have a whole community doing it. Now what was happening is that was limited. Okay, so let's see what happened to the consumers in the middle class segment. So here you had a loss of household income. You had public sector workers still being active. And if you were earning extra income, most of the time you had to put that on hold. Family groups cohabited in small apartments and homes. So where you could isolate yourself as a family, you chose to move there and spend time there. You had access to mobile data and creating home hotspots where people could work if possible and if they had access to Wi-Fi. The media that was consumed is free-to-air radio, TV, and then DSTV Compact, which is the cheaper DSTV package. People were stockpiling as they were paid. So you will know that the lockdown started on the 27th of March. Most people, if they were on a salary, got paid on the 25th of March and could only really go shopping on the 26th. So it was sort of a scramble to get that done. And then you had concerns about falling back or concerns around your career and growth ambitions being put at risk. And so those were the concerns of that segment. Now, what's interesting, if you look, because the middle class, even though you have survivors in shopping centers, the people who are buying the most are the middle class and the top end. And I found this graph particularly interesting because you can see how the shopping practices in terms of shopping centers immediately dropped once the lockdown started. We had panic buying after the 23rd, and then by the 27th, people just stopped visiting. They could, but people were scared. So let's look at the last segment, the top end. 600,000 people out of 58 million. What happened to their consumer behavior? Well, if you were a small business owner, you were severely impacted. People worrying about their pensions and investments that are coming at risk, because this is not just a localized or South African phenomenon, but a global phenomenon. The privilege here is about living in your own home. We have good space, access to space, and you have amenities, you have hot water, you have running water, you have a toilet that's indoors, so you don't have to worry about whether it rains or it's cold or hot or whatever. The top end has access to Wi-Fi and fiber most of the time at their homes. Of course, a generalization, but this is the group that consumed digital offerings and could interact digitally via Zoom, via Microsoft Teams, via Skype, whatever, WhatsApps. I don't know about you, but I just experienced, I would leave my phone and come back to 100 WhatsApps waiting for me. It's just like it exploded. I'm just watching your comments and see if you have any comments here. And then the streaming, what people were doing because they had access to Wi-Fi was You're streaming media, you're streaming Netflix, YouTube, Apple TV if you had access to it, DSTV, and your mobile was always on. Then a lot of people in this segment then shifted to online shopping services where they could, or looking at niche local providers. Instead of having to move out of their comfort zone, they were shopping as locally as possible. Then you had lifestyle, their lifestyle was in lockdown, so where they might have planned an overseas trip or a weekend away, suddenly that became redundant. And really the anxiety felt in this top end was more about a good, I see Miriam. Yeah, I'm with you. Lots of WhatsApps and groups. Something amazing, but incredible you'll see now in terms of the response. So the top end really experienced a lifestyle on lockdown, a lifestyle change on lockdown. So let's look, I found this hugely interesting. Considering that this applies to mainly the top end and the middle class who had access to Wi-Fi. And I'm hoping you're all looking at this and saying, yes, I totally relate to this. So people who had never thought about it were suddenly Zooming. And Zooming for birthdays, I don't know how many of you out there had birthdays during this time. You had time to actually engage with social media. And I mean, those first 21 days were quite eerie because suddenly your excuse for not having time became redundant. And because many of you are employed, I'm assuming that a lot of you stopped working for a period of time. I don't know if there are any, I haven't put a poll in there. Are there any of you who actually worked harder than ever? Because that was, to me, there were the two extremes. There were people who were able to just stop altogether because there wasn't a work at home option. And then on the other extreme, there were people who actually had to work harder because now they could work at home. And because you were sitting in front of your computer, you actually walked away realizing you'd sat uninterrupted. No phone calls, no meetings, no traveling time. You suddenly had a concentrated day. And so to me, the apps and the response in terms of apps just shows you what consumers were busy with, especially in segments 2 and 3. I've added house party. I don't know how many of you have teenagers in the house, but house party was one of the apps. Obviously, this result that I've shown you here is for Google Play. I couldn't find similar for Apple. But House Party in South Africa was one of the most downloaded apps. And I just gave you a screenshot of this article in Forbes. So if we go to the next slide, what I've done is I found a visual YouTube video that sort of worked on this information and just presented. You've seen a lot of data presented in this sort of video form. What I've done is it's always hard to, if you get a PDF and you can't click on the hyperlink, I just created a QR code that you could use right now if you're sitting there with your phone and quickly read it. Then you can actually see this video and you can see how at the start, unfortunately, I want to tell you, and you'll see it when you look at the YouTube video, there were only 2 of us at that stage that had downloaded or watched this video. And so, yeah, to me that was disappointing. But I did check the source, so it is reliable. The only disappointment here is you don't know when it started and when it ends. You don't know the time frame in which this data has been captured or presented. Okay, so we're on the finishing slot here. I see it's 11, and I just have a few more ideas in terms of consumer behavior. And this really applies to the 2 top segments, the middle class and the top end. So the 3 primary consumer responses and change in behavior was release, reset, and reframe. And this is based on 2 sets of articles that I sourced while I was preparing. The one was a webinar presented in May by the head of strategy for Saatchi & Saatchi, MNC Saatchi Abel, the Black and White agency, head of strategy there, Diana Springer, and the head of strategy in South Africa. And I think it was Diana Springer who highlighted these three different responses in terms of consumer behavior. The one is release, and release is really a consumer response when your activity has been restricted for a period of time and suddenly you're able to start buying. And you've seen it in your own behavior, but what happens there is then you see customers being quite discerning and fussy about wanting this heightened experience, because now they've not been able to spend, and now when they spend, the expectations are much higher than normal. What's also interesting is this reset. So customers have a time to actually reflect a little bit on their lives, what's important and what's not important. And I don't know if you found it, but you actually reflected, you had time, to look at your own responses. And you could reflect on your good and bad habits. You could do a Marie Kondo and clean out your wardrobe in your home and repack and throw out. I don't know if any of you went crazy, but that's what customers were busy doing in the first part of the lockdown. It felt a bit like holiday. Yes, it was terrible, but the initial response to that shock, even though people might have been in denial, was really a case of, wow, now I've got time to do things I've been wanting to do. However, when customers came back, now because those habits have been reset, they now got a higher expectation in terms of convenience. I don't want to wait in a queue. If I've ordered a takeaway, I want to be able to come and fetch it. If you've said to me, I must be there in 15 minutes, when I walk in, I don't want to be waiting. And I want you to have printed the bill, and I want to be able to process it and leave. I don't want to hang around here because I'm now worried about my safety. People were also looking for tools that could help them find what they wanted. So something that could curate content. So if you weren't finding what you wanted on Netflix, then you would go and find it somewhere else, or on DSTV, or whatever you use to consume media, and you would probably find apps that would help you. If Takealot, what I saw with Takealot, for instance, their whole message was, wow, now you're in lockdown, now you've got time to shop and look and dream and wish and see what you want. And that was really about that. And then the last thing about community is about supporting those people who supported you through this time of crisis. And now you're going back to those places that were involved in supporting the survivors in your community. And the last one is reframe. So now you've reset your priorities as a consumer, and now you're looking for brands with a clear purpose. We always think of Nike. We're looking for enriching experiences, and they're a great example of that is Apple's Today and Apple, and they've introduced the one at home. So there's a lot of Apple people showing you how to use the apps on Apple's iPhone to do brilliant things in terms of videos and photography and just workflow. And then you're also looking, your reframing as a customer is about tangible and quantifiable value. How can I get this in terms of where I'm buying and what I'm shopping? And one of the apps that Diana Springer mentioned in that article and at the conference was Checkers 6060, where you could order online and have your delivery in 60 minutes. And it wasn't limited to size. Okay, a lot of talking there. So let's just look at the last, one of the last slides. There's certain tensions we experience. I'm not going to go through those. And read it for yourself. I'm going to skip over that. So let's just look at the crisis and how it impacted on us as consumers. If you can go to the next slide. We're on this poll, that's right. Let's just look at the results of that poll, because there's certain tensions that you experienced during lockdown. Let's see which one of those, if you can respond to those, that poll so long, shortage versus simplicity, cool. Okay, but if we can move on to the next slide while people are voting, that's great. And the next slide. Okay, I just shared this with you, another model that could be used in terms of response to change, the 5 C's developed by a management consulting team that works in organizations around change management. And it's about looking at people who are basically positive on the continent to those who are basically negative and naming them. And if you look at that, that's a typical bell curve. So I think just a way of explaining people's consumers' response to change and how they would respond in terms of being consumers. If we look at the next slide, while you're still responding, let's see how this poll's going. Okay, keep working. This is always working. Shortage versus simplicity, that's great. Boredom versus quality time. Media empowers versus media overwhelms. But mainly, a lot of you seem to have kept working versus always working and just trying to stay sane. Okay, so if we look at this model, Nielsen did research, market research about how countries globally were responding to the virus and how it was spreading. And this slide just summarizes those 6 different stages and summarizes our South African response. I've just generalized, but you can see stage 3 was linked to the preparation before lockdown, then we went into lockdown, and stage 5 and 6 were really about how we responded in terms of the lift in the hard lockdown. So let's look at the 6 major areas of change in consumption dynamics, also based on the research done by Nielsen. And Kelly Arnold's, one of the quotes I've highlighted there, said the longer consumers remain in restricted living conditions, the more significant the economic, financial, and social impacts will be. And the more time consumers will have had to significantly adjust their behavior and consumption dynamics and adopt these habits as necessary or entrenched behaviors. And we know that new habits are created within 21 days, and we've been in lockdown so long, we've had chance to create those new habits. And if you just look at these 6 different behavior consumption dynamics that have changed, I'm sure you could identify it in your own business, within your own department in terms of how your customers are responding. For instance, reshape wallets. What's important now? My income might have diminished. I'm not certain about the future, so I've really cut down in terms of spending. And we have to respond in terms of the value we are providing to our customers. Changing product needs and demands, leading to us reassessing pricing mechanisms. You've looked at, for instance, Woolworths and how they're repositioning what the value that they're offering in terms of combinations of groceries. And you've seen how discounts are being given, allowing people to spend on similar things, but spending less because of the discounts, COVID-19 discounts. Just want to, that one about origin matters was something that was highlighted, and it's really about buying local, realizing that now we've got limitations on imported goods, and now we have to start looking at suppliers and also supporting our local suppliers because we know it's being hard hit by the economy. The next slide. It's examples of pivoting. I mean, a word that we didn't know before the lockdown. And I thought these were so very interesting. So really take time to look at it. I got it from an article published by FinTech on the Payflex platform. And Derek Sykes, the COO of Payflex, just highlighted 6 different forms of pivoting that he'd seen successfully happening. Obviously, because it was their article, he mentioned that they'd also pivoted in terms of helping smaller businesses go digital in terms of their payment options. So have a look at those examples. Digital consultations is more about being your clients now buying online and being able to see showrooms with tiles, bathroom tiles and different fittings. Closing the social distancing gap. Dry Dock is an alcohol and beverage retailer, and how they started doing online wine tastings while people had time and they could discern and see by the time they're ready to buy, what are they buying. Epion helped health professionals gain access to COVID-19 screening tests. Redshift helped small businesses go online in terms of ordering platforms, which I thought was fantastic. Kim Whitaker initiated Winter Beds, which was really about making those hotels and guest houses that were closed available for isolation, because we don't have enough hospital beds. And Registered Communication was provide a solution to the problem of signing legal documents online. Right, we are almost at the end. I see we're running out of time. Yoko is a payment, I don't know if you've seen these payment devices. It looks a little bit like a calculator, and you insert your credit card and then you can pay. It's a lot of small and medium businesses, or if you've been to market, it's one of those cheaper options in terms of replacing credit card machines. And what they found is, because of all the data they were gathering in terms of small businesses, their clients, they could actually share this data, and they created a small business recovery monitor. You can go and look at it online, and you can see at the bottom, it gives you the difference, the lockdown announcement 23rd of March, then the lockdown that we went into, and as the lockdown lifted, level 4, level 3. And just showing in those 3 highly distressed industries, that's why I asked you which industry you're in, you can see the recovery as the lockdown eased. And it's interesting because you can see now, as time goes by, how our active cases are increasing. Right, let me just see quickly, because we are basically done. I have one last slide to share with you. And this is, I saw this on LinkedIn. I thought, wow, you've hit the nail on the head. I don't know how many of you at work are speaking about, or at home are speaking about going back to normal. But you and I know that there is no normal anymore. We will not go back to what was. And to me, this slide, if you have a look, you'll see it really encapsulates that it's about responding to this crisis, embracing it in terms of the Kubler-Ross curve of change, our response to change, and seeing it as a way forward. And with our customers and their responses, it's really about understanding that that's an opportunity to change how we do business and to respond to their business. Okay, so my Q&A slide has now vanished, and I'm not sure what's happened there. A question. Let's see it. Quibus. Oh, thanks, Quibus.
Hello.
Hello. So there's a question. Do you want to deal with the questions, Quibus?
Michelle, wow, yeah. Colleagues, thank you. Michelle, fascinating stuff. Just before we get to the question, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I talk on behalf of everyone else. It was such an excellent contextualization, I believe, and how customers responded to these changes, on that continuum from denial and until the problem-solving point, and even sharing your own experiences at the Ocean Basket, fascinating. And then when we reflected on the survivors, the middle class, and the top end, and as you took us through this, this wonderful presentation, and enlightening us on the customer behavior and our customer experiences. One put oneself into that category as you took us through, and a lot of reflection also during this discussion. But also great is the notion of the releasing and the resetting and the reframing, and towards the end, when we talk about the pivoting, which we are accustomed to in the entrepreneurial type of business world, when you reach a point where you have to make a readjustment and reorientate, pivot away because the path on which you are is no longer applicable, it's on a dead end. And then, of course, the 5 C's and how we respond to the change and the tension that one also experiences. I was thinking when you said the 21 days to create a new habit, I also understand that 90 days, it then becomes a way of life. And today's 75 days, another 15 days, becoming a way of life. So, Michelle, fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's see what that first question from Leanne asking or stating there, to see the change in behavior in the business to business space, how behavior has changed there. Michelle, any comments on that one?
So I've spoken to various people. Specifically, I'm working with students who operate in the marine engineering environment. And so there is a business-to-business response, and that's unique because they actually have had to carry on working right throughout the lockdown. And I think the challenge there, because I focus mainly on business to consumer, but I think the main change there is being able to translate what you're doing from face-to-face to working digitally and online, and see how rapidly you can respond in terms of doing that. And then where we worked on a high-touch environment, now we're working on a very low-touch distancing and using digital platforms. So I don't know a clear answer to that, but definitely something of great interest in terms of different industries and how industries have responded. I don't know if there's anyone online that can share their experiences. Tabi Singh's also asked a question, and I think that's very interesting. She asked, if you revert to the slide which shows the various segments, do you think that businesses will relook their target segments based on the behavior of customers during COVID-19? I want to tell you that I don't think businesses can afford to not relook their segments. I think you almost have a whole demographic change, because you'll see where UCT's research based on household income, you're going to see migration of people into different categories as household income becomes affected. So I think you're going to have to relook your categories and relook how you position yourself in terms of each of your segments.
Awesome, Michelle. I was just thinking here, and no intention of putting you on the spot, but when one thinks of the behavior and you align that, let's say, with ethical conduct and the ethical or being presented with ethical difficulties. If one considers specifically now from consumer perspective, and you alluded to that in one of the first slides, that part that referred to the banning, so to speak, of consumption of alcohol and tobacco products, then probably, and I'm just assuming here that the ordinary citizen, or the citizen that abides by the laws and by the rules and pays their taxes and everything else, What are your sense from a consumer behavior perspective? How many people might have been drawn, to conduct in ways that probably wouldn't have been befitting the restrictions?
In other words, buying alcohol and cigarettes when we weren't supposed to. I actually think, I mean, it would be so interesting to see how many people who usually, under normal circumstances, would never even occur to them to break the law, would now actually do it because their actual comfort was affected. So, I mean, to me, the greatest eye-opener was those segments. Because suddenly you realize that actually any regulation that was released under the Disaster Management Act wasn't for the top end of South Africa. It was for the 50 million people who fall into that first segment. So you saw the minute the ban on alcohol was lifted, there was another crisis that hit us because suddenly our emergency rooms, and the reason for the lockdown, the reason why we're flattening the curve, was actually obliterated because suddenly all those beds that we tried to make available for this rising contamination had to be used for emergencies because of alcohol-related incidents. So suddenly it puts it in perspective. So I think your question was about changing consumer behavior from an ethics perspective. How many of us started, and I include myself in that, because I consider myself as a highly ethical person who, if you tell me to walk on the right of the yellow line, I will do it, and I will call out the guy who walks on the left of the yellow line. But I tell you, under these unprecedented times, because everyone's using that, unprecedented times, I think people's behavior was unprecedented. We did things that we would never have done before. And so, I mean, your comments on the change of behavior, the change of habits, and now the change of lifestyle, I think we are even amazed at what we've done. I don't know if that hopefully that answers your question, Purpose.
No, absolutely, because how I got, I think it was 3 days or so ago, I read the wonderful article by an ethicist, who was referring to the fact that, in general, he applies the rules without that type of thing, but then being confronted in himself about this knee-jerk reaction to, as what you referred to, your way of life. Let's say the consumption of a glass of wine with supper or something like that, and what one would, how one should. When is one justified, so to speak? But it's just sorry. That's maybe a debate for another day. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Michelle. It was I just find it quite fascinating when we as individuals want to do good, but are also confronted when we cannot always comprehend to understand the reasoning behind everything. But nonetheless, are there any more questions?
More questions. So the questions are coming through the chat, and I think it's almost easier to put it there, Quibus. Can I respond to them?
Yeah, sure. Please, Michelle.
Okay, so Miriam asked a question about Metro Rail and the response of the public sector. So, I mean, you saw in the beginning of lockdown, and you saw the research done by Fragizo, and why that article that I took that information from was called "Lockdown is a Pipe Dream in Our Townships." And I think it's a pipe dream to think that you are going to have 50 million people who have no alternatives suddenly adhering to social distancing norms and having to comply. And you would have seen in some of those photographs where the top end and the middle class each have, I don't know how many masks you have, but where I have 3 or 4 masks, there are families of 4 or 6 sharing a mask. Now tell me that, that defeats the whole objective of wearing a mask. And in terms of that public sector question that you have, I think that we're going to have to look at how do we enable people who cannot adhere to social distancing norms to stay safe in that environment. And I think it's that innovation, simple things about actually providing masks as people walk into the metro rail centers, or provide, the sanitation that's become a new normal now in terms of walking into shopping centers or walking into shops and showing people how to sanitize their hands properly. I just think we can't ignore, it doesn't help we say, well, you have to just adhere to social distancing. Well, it's impossible. So let's try and be innovative around how we overcome those challenges. I hope that answers your question, Miriam. I'm sure we could carry on with that for a while. And then Camilla asks about the casino industry that's still in lockdown. Now, you will understand that I so relate to that because I'm sitting in our ocean basket in Manus. It is empty. There is just myself sitting in here doing the webinar, and not a customer in sight because we are closed. And I can just imagine if you're in the casino industry, that it is, you have not had income now for the last almost 3 months. I think that this pivoting is our new normal, and the speed with which casinos can accept the new normal of those massive casinos going online, and the minute they bring out their apps or bring out their alternatives and start pushing their loyalty cards online so that people can still access that same experience they had in the casinos online, the quicker you will be able to start trading. If I think of what you've had to do in restaurants, we haven't opened yet because in Amanus, which you understand is a seaside town, it's seasonal. This is our quietest part of the year. So takeaways and deliveries is a challenge anyway. We're really having to now embrace that as we move forward and make it, trying to get our face-to-face experience, our in-restaurant sit-down experience online, and try and incorporate that as much as we can into our takeaways and deliveries. And I think the casino industry will have similar. Any industry that relies, hotels, bed and breakfasts, your local coffee shop that relies on a high-touch experience. Now, the challenge there is to take that high-touch experience and translate it to an online experience for your customers. And it's the speed with which you can pivot that will be your success.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I hope that answers that question. Cool. So I mean, I hope you enjoyed this, because I want to tell you, I hope my excitement about just discovering things that had so much market research has been done during this time. Some of you might follow certain research institutions. One of them that I follow is Harambee and JET. And I just saw how the people just immediately pivoted into research mode and used the opportunity where people had time to respond to surveys to actually do research that was interesting and relevant. So I'm sorry, Quibus, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Michelle. No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
I really hope that. Yeah. So yeah, I hope I addressed the brief. I hope you've walked away today with some interesting insights, and I hope that you in your business realize that it's really about embracing this change, seeing how you can pivot and how you can now meet the new normal and the new needs of your customers. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Michelle, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. With the Ocean Basket there in Omanis, also all the best. And as you are also challenged by the circumstances and how you also have to pivot and make adjustments, all the best with that. But thank you for the very, very valuable insights that you've shared with us. You've left us with a lot of food for thought. And even as we journey ahead individually, or in our businesses, our organizations, some of the takeaways from this discussion that we could definitively apply. I was, when you spoke just now about the casinos going online and stuff like that, for those of you who attend gymnasiums and you can't go there anymore, I have noticed that even online you can't even purchase a 5 kilogram weight plate anymore. It's just everybody's sold out on the stuff because people are now setting themselves up at home to keep on training and so forth. But yeah, fascinating how our change and how we have to pivot and adjust and so forth. But colleagues, also for you that attended, thank you very, very much. We apologize for the small glitches in the beginning. We don't have control over the weather, and some of these atmospheric disturbances has an influence on connection and connection speed and so forth. But we've broken through that. We still managed to provide you with, I believe, a wonderful morning of sharing awesome stuff. Michelle, again, thank you so much. To all one that attended, thank you very much. I think if there at the end of this, there's a link for some feedback that we can use, please, how to go forward and improve our webinars to you. There we go. It's on there. Thank you very much, Michaela. SurveyMonkey, there's the click. You can just follow through. To everyone, thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you again on this channel where we believe tomorrow is beautiful. Signing off. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cobus.